because so many legal analysts have described this to me, this novel, creative approach that Bragg has deployed here. They have described it to me as legal jujitsu, legal acrobatics. I want to read this here. So Trump, he was being charged with a felony because Bragg alleged he falsified business records in furtherance of a separate crime. They say that separate crime is in violation of New York election law, which makes it a crime to promote or prevent the election of any person to a public office by unlawful means. We're talking about the 2016 presidential election here. So to satisfy the unlawful means component here, the DA, Bragg, put forth three possibilities. We've talked about this. One, a federal campaign finance violation. Two, the creation of additional false records. And three, a tax law violation. Do we know which one the jury ultimately decided on? Remember, they did not have to be in unanimity on all three of them, but at least one of them. Do we know that yet?
We don't, Andrew, and we will never know because Judge Juan Merchan said that the jurors don't have to be unanimous. And this was a big deal to Donald Trump himself. And he was posting on social media about it. He was upset. He thought the jurors had to be unanimous on this issue. And it will be an appellate issue. I'm sure the parties briefed it, but we know that Trump will appeal. He has some decent arguments on appeal, and this is going to be one of them.
Yeah, that's a good point because you mentioned just the vagueness. I think that's something Morgan McKay alluded to, the second part of all these charges. And maybe inside of that jury room, how much of a debate do you think there was? How much debate do you think there is about the different kind of angles, the different forks of these, the second components of this, and maybe how much conversation do they have to be? Do they have to announce that, hey, I'm in favor of this one over this one, or does it say, hey, I just think one of those consists of it being accurate?
Well, they have to be unanimous that there was this additional crime. And, you know, if it's confusing for me as a 20-plus year lawyer who's handled thousands of cases, I'm sure it was confusing for those jurors, even the lawyer jurors. So, you know, the question is, was the statute vague? Did it give Trump enough notice? That's something that they've argued from the outset, and I think they're going to continue to argue on appeal. You know, with respect to what the jurors were thinking, I really think the question and the readback was telling. It had nothing to do with necessarily the records themselves, whether they were false or not. We didn't hear about all this discussion of whether a verbal retainer is permitted in the state of New York or did it have to be a written one, and how these were categorized. We're really hearing from Pecker, and Pecker ties Trump to the intent. He's the one that allows us to get in the former president's head, because aside from the recording and maybe some excerpts from his book and social media posts, we didn't really hear much about Trump's intent aside from those conversations with Pecker. So when I knew the jurors were asking about Pecker, my guess, and it turned out to be right, was that there were jurors that were convinced that the records were false, Trump had the requisite knowledge, and that there was this other crime. And they were using that testimony to convince the holdout jurors. I don't know how many holdout jurors there were yesterday. There were some. I think at the end of the day today, there was one that was on the fence, that was undecided, and that 4:30 time to go home caused him or her to change their mind, and that's why we got that verdict today. The Pecker testimony tied it all together in a nice bow, and I got to give credit to the prosecution for calling him as their first witness. They thought he was their strongest witness at the beginning of the case. And at the very end of the case, it came full circle, and it turned out that they were right. Pecker was the star witness here, and not Michael Cohen.
So you're saying, and we've been talking about reading tea leaves, for the last hour and a half here, and maybe that was the tea leaf, the revisiting of the Pecker testimony. You know, Neama, that's so interesting here. You know, a lot of, especially conservative legal commentators throughout the course of this trial have kind of issued a common refrain, Neama. I want you to comment on that. You know, essentially saying, where's the crime? There's no crime here. After today, how does that hold up?
I understand the argument. Having an affair is not unlawful. Covering it up and paying off your mistress is not unlawful. So really it's kind of like getting Al Capone on tax evasion, right? So is this the biggest deal? Probably not. You know, that's why I don't think Trump is going to get any prison time. Now, do I think The DC election fraud case is a big deal. Absolutely. If someone's trying to overthrow our democracy. So we'll see what happens in that case if it ever happens. But I do agree with a lot of the commentators that you're going to charge a former president. Should he have been charged in a case like this 8 years later in the middle of a presidential election? I don't know the answer to that. Turns out that the jurors thought it was a righteous case, but I think the pundits do have a valid point that of all the things that Donald Trump has done, to get him on this doesn't necessarily make a whole lot of sense. Was this a good use of public resources and our time?
Yeah, all right, that is a good point. The timeline, a lot of questions, but of course, likely an appeal coming. I do want to put up, again, another post on social media coming down. This one from the former president on his Truth Social platform. He posts online about this conviction of the 34 counts as well, saying, quote, "This was a disgrace, a rigged trial by a conflicted judge who is corrupt. We will fight for our Constitution. This is long from over." That on Truth Social, not really long-winded, but echoing what he's said time and time again as we watch the motorcade continue to go through Manhattan. I do have to ask you, as we're about to let you go here, Neama, Alvin Bragg coming up in about 30 minutes or so, the DA, what can we expect from him, and how careful does he have to be with his words after this verdict is reached?
I expect to hear a little bit of a victory lap now that the case is over. Now, Alvin Bragg obviously wasn't personally litigating this case, but he's the one that gave the green light for this unprecedented prosecution. And I would ask Jack Smith and Fani Willis if they would have had the intestinal fortitude to be the first to charge a former president. I don't know if they would have had it not been for Alvin Bragg. So regardless of the outcome of this case, whether you think these types of prosecutions are righteous or political persecution, I think Alvin Bragg did open a door that will forever be open, and these types of prosecutions may be common going forward. So really the question is, what have we done, and was this all worth it?
All right, Kraft, I think that kind of puts a bow on it. You kind of just talked about, obviously, the historical nature of it. Neama, thank you again. Your insight is so great, so invaluable here on Live Now from Fox. An unprecedented day there. Donald Trump found guilty on those 34 counts in New York. We appreciate your time, as always. Thank you so much for joining us for the better part of an hour.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Andrew. I'll see you real soon.
All right, talk to you soon. All right, thank you again, guys, as we will continue.